Good afternoon and most welcome to 997. And I will mention today something in connection with Nina Krause and the vision of hearing. And it is about how do we hear? How do we make sense of our hearing impressions? Actually, there is very firm indications that how it's said, it's much more important for the understanding than what it said. And this sounds very much like the ontological question, where we usually say that what is in the text is the meaning. For instance, what the words say or the sentences. But this I heard before, this is not where from meaning comes. I mentioned it briefly earlier when I went into Nina Krause and her colleagues, and that is that she noticed people who read a text and they don't hear voices when they read a text, not internal voices, and instead it's a sort of a neutral tune, a reading tone. Those people will understand much less of the text. They don't get in as deeply. This is similar. Let me get into the article. It's a rather short article. For instance, going up in pitch at the very end of a statement will change it from a statement to a question. It can also change into a sort of conjunctive. That means it's not sure. It can also change to a command. The changes are immensely. Nina Krause has mentioned almost 1,000 different changes in one sentence. And they are massive. And they are sometimes contradictory. And this is not shown in the text. And apropos that, I can mention this book I just briefly look into. And this book says that everything is not in the words. We use our hands, we use our bodies to put extra things into the words. I think that assumption, there's an underlying assumption that the words actually carry the meaning. This is something that Nina Krause is questioning. It is the whole thing that shows the meaning, every part of the meaning. And they are not really separable. Because she shows clearly also that changes in pitch will actually change both subject, object and verb, everything in the sentence. And then we have my favorite case, which is not mentioned in the article, and that is irony. Irony can never be told. And irony actually cannot be translated. I tried to do it myself. Many years ago, I tried to translate a Japanese text to Swedish. And I remember there was an ironical line in the text, and I asked the professor, what is the true meaning of this? And she said, it doesn't have a true meaning. What it says, it's what it says. But I said, obviously, it could be ironical. And she said, yes, it is, and also it is not. And this is very common. And I think, especially like 15, 20 years ago, when we had this idea of the ironical generation, I think that was the generation just after my own. I belong to Generation X, and I think Generation Y was the ironical generation. And I know partly why that idea of the ironical generation started, because, of course, my generation was Generation X. The next one was Generation Y. Y is a question that usually comes after irony. But I don't think you can be sure of our irony, that irony really has the opposite effect or anything like that. This idea of clearing out irony is something that in itself is weird, I would say. And I think irony would stop to be irony at the very moment you think, oh, that is what that person really means. Then it's no longer irony. It's not just what you say that matters, it is how you say it. Take the phrase, "Here's Johnny," when Ed McMahon used to introduce Johnny Carson on The Tonight Show. The words were an enthusiastic greeting, but in The Shining, Jack Nicholson used the same two words to convey murderous intent. Now scientists are reporting in the journal Science, the second biggest science magazine in the world, that they have identified specialized brain cells that help us understand what the speaker really means. These cells do this by keeping track of changes in the pitch of the voice. According to Adi Chang, we found that there were groups of neurons that were specialized and dedicated just for the processing of pitch, says Dr. Eddie Chang, a professor of neurological surgery at the University of California, San Francisco. Chang says that these neurons allow the brain to detect the melody of speech or intonation, while other specialized brain cells identify vowels and consonants. Intonation is about how we say things, says Chang. It is important because we change the meaning even without actually changing the word themselves. For example, by raising the pitch of our voice at the end of a sentence, a statement can become a question. The identification of neurons that detect changes in pitch was largely the work of Claire Tang, a graduate student in Chang's lab and the Science paper's lead author. Tang and a team of researchers studied the brains of 10 epilepsy patients awaiting surgery. The patients had electrodes placed temporarily on the surface of the brains to help the surgeon identify the source of the seizures. This allowed the team to monitor the activity of cells in each patient's brain as they listened to a series of sentences spoken by a computer. What we did was change where the intonation contour, the pitch changes, were happening in each of those sentences, Chang says. So the volunteers would hear different versions of a sentence like, "Reindeers are visual animal." Sometimes the computer voice started high and low, like "Reindeer are visual animals," making the sentence a statement. Other times it started low and ended high, making the sentence a question. "Reindeer are visual animals?" The cells that track pitch didn't care whether they heard a high female voice or a low male voice, Chang says. It was the pattern of the pitch that changes that matter. To people like musicians, this is not a surprise, Chang says, because you can take a melody, shifts all of its notes higher or lower, but it's still recognizable, which is actually true. And also surprised me here when I read this, they're both Chinese, both Tang and Chang. In Chinese, you have an expression called ma. And for me as a Westerner, at least in the beginning, for me it meant like mother, something like that. In Chinese, although, depending on the pitch, ma means horse, ma means mum, ma means linen, ma, question. So all those things are just the difference in pitch, exactly the same consonant, exactly the same vowel, and just the intonation or the pitch that change. And of course, the difference is immense. And I even remember giving up on Chinese because I tried to learn the word for ice. I was visiting China in July and it was immensely hot. So of course the need for ice, for cool drinks and also chilling off inside the room was very important. And I tried to pronounce Bing, which is called, that's ice in Chinese. several times. I think I called the staff up 4 times. I said to them, Bing, and they came in with something else. The first time it was the thermos that doesn't have a name that's even close to Bing, but they chanced, they probably want hot tea. No, that was not what I wanted. Later they sent somebody over, what do you really want? We want ice, we want Bing. Oh no, Bing, they said. Nobody could hear the difference. That makes the whole difference. There's no surprise to understand that the intonation changed what we say. And without the intonation, there is a lucky guess to say that we developed a sort of conformist way of reading, because we don't have that information. So I think we learn that, and there is indication coming from Krause, already known, that that is the case. And that conformal reading could be very helpful, but as Derrida showed us, it could be very damaging because it takes away what the author really intended, or all the depth, all the different turns, all the different direction a text can take you into. Well, Krause is the most interesting, so let's continue with her. She is a neurobiologist who runs the Auditory Neuroscience Laboratory at Northwestern University. Processing sound, she says, is one of the most complex jobs that we ask our brain to do, Krause says. And it's a skill that some brains learn better than others, she says. That's extraordinarily important, because the difference in understanding spoken language and written text is on the scale 1 to 20. Some people get 20% more out of the text, and that makes the whole difference. Krause found that when she did a study that looked where the musicians were better than people who aren't musicians at recognizing the subtle tone changes found in Mandarin Chinese. She said, English-speaking musicians were able to process with high precision those contours, and the non-musicians didn't. I am a non-musician. I've never been able to play any instrument. I hugely enjoy music, but I don't know to play for the love of life. On the other hand, recognizing intonation is a skill that's often impaired in people with autism, Krause says. A typical developing child will process those pitch contours very precisely, Krause says, but some kids on the autism spectrum don't. They understand the words you're saying, but they are not understanding how you mean it. The new study suggests that it might be the specific brain cells that we usually keep track of pitch are not working as they should. And I think this is interesting. This conformist way of reading, that's absolutely necessary. I don't think we would be able to read otherwise. And this is something that we are completely unaware of. And I think we learn that while we grow up. And taken too far, we get this neutral tone when we read a book. And that neutral tone, it doesn't matter if the book is of a non-fictional character as this one, or a fictional one. Understanding will come slower. There are even indications that when you read really abstract material, like mathematics, logic, system theory, computer engineering and such stuff, it's really abstract, really hard to get. I remember myself when I tried to learn the computer language C++, which is immensely complicated, and it demanded high abstract thinking from my side. You have to do logic things in many directions, and you have to create what they call objects, and these objects are going to be parents to a child who has all the qualities and then some. The whole system is incredibly advanced, and I had no idea about it. It's very interesting. But as soon as I began to learn this, I put in the position of trying to read the text as it was neutral, because I think that's the way to approach a scientific text that I had to learn as well, because I needed that for my work. It did not work. And we tried out for 3 months. It was together with my friend Simon, who actually is a teacher when it comes to computer science. And he told me in the end, what sort of voice do you hear in your head when you read these formulas? I said, I don't think it has a tone. I just read it and try to figure out the meaning. And he said directly, that won't work. You need tone to the voice. And I can give you an example. When I read this tone, this thing, I hear the voice of my mother. She's very good at explaining. But I also heard her being in a very jolly state. And it turned out to be absolutely correct. As long as I forgave my neutral tone, that computer voice tone, which is way too regular. And a regular tone can carry information. We show that with the heart, it's the same with the body, it's the same with the intellect. If it's too neutral, if it doesn't have this curvature and irregularities of a real voice, understanding won't come. And this is something that Krause's colleague McCormack is pointing to, how very advanced intellectual people always use personalized voices, and also discussions in the book. Even if it's a fact book, there's discussions going on. And I remember one of the lines I read, people could even be angry and overjoyous. This is the only chance of understanding a text, because the neutral tone, it's too regular, it's too imitated, it's a copy, it's not the real thing. Everything that is true and real does have irregularities, and those irregularities can't be produced by my imagination. It needs to come from reality itself. It's only reality that has that level of complexity. And all of a sudden, oddly enough, what we learn from Nina Krause is that could be another way to explain the difference between what is real and what is copied or imagined. So we don't have to go into the mistake of creating a Platonic world, because I think that was the only option from the point of view of Socrates and Plato. That most probably couldn't tell the difference. So they couldn't know what was real, and they, maybe in an emotional stir-up, just to help themselves, they invented this idea of the worlds of idea. It was never tempting to me myself, but I think that had other reasons, because I stranded myself in logic in the end. And what is classical logic if not the idea of... I don't think they could tell what it was real and what was unreal. And we were speaking before of statistical service and everything, how difficult it is for regular people to know what is true or not true. I would try to find this book a woman wrote in Swedish about how to know what is fake, how to know what is true. A whole book, and the advice were incredibly complicated. It included contacting researchers, having one's own research base, and so forth and so forth. And especially in this case, with a friend of mine who's a professor in statistics at Chalmers, it actually made me depressed when he told me I can't know. And he just said, you can never know. If you read statistics in the newspaper, even if the citation is absolutely correct, the conclusion you will make would be most certainly wrong, because you need the background information, and that is not something that is possible to put in a newspaper. It needs the whole education. But it could be. This is my first hope, and I had this hope for quite a while now. There is another way other than that very, very long and complicated and impossible to perform idea of an ideal truth world with originals and all that. And that is complexity. And when it comes to complexity, there's nothing in our fantasy that can copy the complexity of real things. And this is something that is also coming from the theory of witness investigations. If you are interrogating a witness of a sort, and very few people know this, but it's been proven for quite some time, I think like 60 years, that very skilled investigators can, to 95% of the cases, actually tell truth from lie. And that includes even skilled liars, like people who are dishonest or being spies, actually working with things that takes lying into the concept, even spies. And that has to do not with the idea of a content in the words, to compare that to real situation, the Platonic way, which is, I start to think, is more and more ludicrous. It would be absurd. Where would that world be situated? And the same with this woman who wrote the book about fake news. In what world can we compare true news to fake news? Where would that world be situated? And who has this access to the absolute truth of that world? It doesn't work that way. It's naive. It's on a low scale of complexity. What these investigators do with the witnesses is not listening to some idea of a context. They listen to the whole person. Body, tonation, eyes, hands, presence, and probably things we don't even know about. And they don't know it at the beginning when they start to train. But after 3 to 4 years, they always can tell what is a lie and what is not a lie. And it doesn't matter if what the person tells them is completely unlikely to be true. There are some cases where they try people who experience things that are very unlikely. They tell their story. It sounds like a tale. If you read the transcript, most people will say that is a lie, that can't happen. But the investigators are sure to almost 100% that person is telling the truth, even though the things that happen to them is very unlikely. I think one of those stories was actually a person that fell from an airplane and survived, which is impossible in itself. But it has actually happened one time only. One time it has happened. I don't even remember how it happened. She's still alive to this day. She survived a fall from, I think it was like 5,000 meters. Nobody knows how, but she survived. And therefore we use other methods, helping methods. We use heuristica to understand whether somebody is lying to you or not. If Kalle would have told me that previously, before we met 2 hours ago, that he had an intense meeting with an alien somewhere in room 9, and that alien promised him all the gold that is in the world if he would give up the room to 3 young ladies. I would not have believed him, even though some circumstances were things that I actually observed. I would use a heuristica. My heuristica says to me, no, there's not such a thing as aliens. The witness investigators would not use that method. They would not use the helping tools I have access to. Those helping tools are very good for me, but there are 2 things that they do. One is they weaken my senses. Every time I use a heuristic tool, I will weaken my senses, using my whole body trying to understand whether somebody is telling the truth or not, or whether something is true I read or not, or hear or experience even, because we even tell experience true from real and false. The second thing is I make my world much smaller, because a lot of things are excluded a priori that shouldn't be excluded. Even though aliens do not exist, probably, I can never ever construct a rule to me that says a priori they don't exist, because they could exist. And if we were to speak with an astrophysicist, he would say, yes, they probably most probably exist somewhere. Probably won't have been here, but they do exist. And that could put really big problems to knowledge, because first I assume things I couldn't assume. I think that's the biggest problem. But the second biggest problem is that we get this idea of a world, doubling of the world. One world where I am, and that second world that my heuristica constructs. That second world I don't have direct access to. And that's a constructed world that includes no aliens, for instance. It could include even more specific details. For instance, I thought this morning there were no controller of tickets on the Vesttåg going into Gothenburg from Lindome. That was a constructed rule I had myself. So all these ideas, I think they end in a sort of schizophrenia where you have two worlds. It is better to have one single world where I directly respond to the things around me by complexity, fractality, not this extra path that is so cumbersome. And I think that extra path should be addressed in another lecture, because I realize now that could be a very helpful way of dealing with classical physics. Because classical physics is mostly this doubling of the world, because it's based on heuristica. People don't really have an idea what the classical physical world is about, but they know more or less what it says, and those are heuristica. And I think they limit the world people are living in. Maybe take away the soul and God. Yes?
Yes, but if somebody has a counterclaim, you said there are no facts, but if somebody claims that somebody was born in Kenya and not in the United States, that's a fact that you can control. So are there facts or are there not facts?
No. In a way, but how can you control? How can you be 100% sure? And what do you mean by born? Maybe I have a friend who was born in Rhodesia. That country doesn't even exist. So then people will say, no, he couldn't be born in Rhodesia. I just looked at the map. There is no such country. Well, he was born in Rhodesia. Most people don't know that such a country did exist. But it doesn't exist any longer. So how do you explain that? And maybe the person was born on the border. Maybe he was artificially disseminated. There's so many different things. So it's very, very easy to speak about facts, but some are obvious. Of course, yes, some are that the capital of Soviet Union or Russia is Moscow. But when you go into more important things, that really matters. And it's always when things really matters. When politicians are saying something, there's going to be a big change, or you're going to actually do something based on the information. That information is even more perilous if you're going to make an investigation. Should I sell ice cream that looks yellow and have the taste of ananas or pineapple? Then it's going to be very complicated. And then you would trust heuristica. But I would say also, most people are actually, I say 60-70%, that's an indication of Ben Ariely from Israel. 60 to 70% don't believe there is a God. Why not? Not so much that they looked into the depth for themselves, not so much that they actually try to figure out if there is a God. It's more usual you go for the general rationality of people. And since the general rationality of Israel today, there is no God, because everything is sort of made with technology. The heuristica never includes God. Nobody says to anyone, I hope the train comes soon. They don't say in Israel, if God willing, it will be coming. They just say, look at the timetable. If there is a delay, it won't come. That actually takes away God, and I can testify to that myself. In India, people still say, if God wills, the train will come on time. They still use those expressions. And I don't know if it's 100% working that way, but that's at least is an indication that God is in with his finger. And just think about the Arabs. Inshallah is always present. It does have an effect there. God willingly, it will happen. And I think actually those things that we don't use in Swedish anymore, like subjunctive, they have an absolute effect. I can tell from my own experience, you probably can fill in there. I learned a language at an advanced stage. I was 40 years old, Spanish, which use the subjunctive heavily. And that makes a definite change how you perceive the world. Because that state was not included in my thinking before. Now it is, and it doesn't equal maybe, and it doesn't equal future. It's a third state. And I have that state now. I know how to use it. It's very useful, but it's also another way on the world, which is completely new to me. So it does have some interesting things. We better round up there. I'll say thank you very much, and thanks for this day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.